Welcome to Perspectives from Ayara. Today we're bringing expert perspective with Ron Maples. Ron is a FASB fellow who co-led guidance notes on the subject of revenue recognition. He also served extensively in the industry with leading companies in executive audit and advisory roles. Ron's experience includes implementing and working with multiple revenue accounting systems. He joined Ayara's advisory board in June 2021 to help with our expansion. Today's conversation is led by Aditya, who is our Chief Product Officer at Ayara. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you, Karan. Ron, we're excited to have you here today. And of course, we're also immensely thankful for you to be having your being a part of Ayara's journey in shaping our thought leadership and product innovation. Your experience is very wide and deep. It extends to standard setting, revenue policy formulation for large and growing companies, of course, technical implementations, continuing customer advisory. And I think your services are exemplary and very widely known. What I wanted to gain from you today is your comments on what is the state of automation amongst the customers that you see, what's the state of compliance and challenges, and again, generally, what are the factors driving innovation? I understand, obviously, from a revenue management perspective, size differs, whether it's you're a growth stage company where you're scaling versus a large enterprise. Essentially, we're trying to gain from you what are the key remaining issues in revenue management that are yet need to be addressed.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when the standard first came out, it was all about compliance. Everybody was trying to get up to speed on the standard, and it was a very short period of time to do that. And the answer was either adopt it manually and we'll figure out what we're going to do systematically later on, or you adopt a system and you just get something that will meet compliance. And now, years later, I think most companies sort of fully understand the standard. Obviously, there's complexity associated with it, but they understand generally what the standard is trying to convey. Now, I think what people are looking at, both people who have adopted a system previously or who are still performing their accounting manually, they're looking at a way to make life easier. And part of that is merging all of the various departments within the company, from FP&A, revenue, sales. Because one of the biggest struggles that companies face is a new product comes out and they have to adjust somehow on the fly. And you've got sales, FP&A asking how that's going to be accounted for. Well, they don't have a system set up to handle that yet. Or you have FP&A trying to forecast a transaction and they're looking at sales to give them guidance on forecasted transactions. And sales, as great and as brilliant as they are, generally don't fully understand the revenue standards well enough to project exactly what the accounting is going to be. And so what you end up with is a model where sales goes out and they have all these different prospects and they end up closing a deal and they budget or project what the outcome is going to be from a revenue recognition standpoint. That then gets processed through the revenue engine or through the revenue department, and ultimately they don't look anything alike. And you end up with weeks, months of arguments between sales and finance and everybody else trying to argue why the revenues should be different. And I think so what companies are looking for today is simply one, generically speaking, that makes life easier, that helps bring the different groups together, that can modify on the fly as new products are generated, and one that's just generally easy to use.
Definitely, I think there is definitely a cross-functional. Again, at Ayara we understand and we profess and kind of build for that level of a sort of a unison between functions. Ron, beyond compliance, are there any processing challenges in adoption of the standard itself? Within the core accounting itself, is there a degree of how people have made it easier for themselves to comply, through system implementation or maybe through standardization of their products? Besides, looking at this as a cross-functional challenge, how easy it is for finance teams across the population of our spectrum of customers that you have seen, that they have relatively made it easier for the quarter-on-quarter compliance, with the respective complexity of the standard for their individual business?
I think general compliance, if your operations are static and your sales are static and things are static and everything's sort of just functioning along on the same little line that it always has, life's probably okay for you. But companies I run across, transactions from period to period don't look the same, contracts don't look the same, and that makes for a very complicated model. The thing that in most cases that they're dealing with is they're trying to figure out whether their system that they have in place will actually manage that transaction or if they have to do a workaround. Generally speaking, it's a workaround, particularly if you have what I refer to as the box company software, where your model is you have to put your revenue recognition model together based on the way the software was designed, not necessarily the way you run your business. And so, for most of the companies I run across, that's a no-go, right? They want something that will work with the way they run their business and represent how they do business versus having to take their processes and operations and put it into a box that doesn't really represent them.
Thanks. I think, look, we certainly see, at least in our own experience, prospects and customers not only having solved compliance for what they have today, but I think in constantly being agile about as the sales teams or the business changes, constantly being in a position to cater to that change, essentially from a finance perspective, or being able to bookend account for it as seamlessly as they did for what they know already, right? So that's definitely been our experience. How much of a informational or a reporting challenges do still remain, if to hone in on that aspect?
From a reporting standpoint, it's I would say it's sort of just is what it is. Companies will generate whatever they can get out of the systems. Obviously the reports that people are getting today somehow are working for the reporting, right? But the question you get into is whether the reporting is sufficient to generate the reporting on its own, or whether there's manual workarounds to do that, right? Just with items like SSP, for example, while it's not necessarily reporting, but it actually runs into the reporting aspect. There's some systems that will calculate that with ease, and some you have to export the data and do your manual calculations like you've always done. And so the question that you really get into is not so much whether you can get the reports, but whether you get the reports with the information that you need.
That's a great point on SSP, because I think, SSP is not just an accounting problem, right? It may actually become a sales conversation as to, before your next SKO, right? Every year, how are you really updating your revenue policy guidance on pricing, and that the sales teams know that, right? So it's a continuing cycle as we see it. I think definitely informational outputs are necessary to make sure that every function understands that, and not merely see this as a back-end accounting problem. So that this is definitely impactful to the entire business if any of these are not in sync. Thanks. Our intent in launching Perspectives is obviously to go deeper on some of these topics as we execute. How much do you think, with the advent of the CRO, as opposed to this, revenue management or revenue recognition was treated as a CFO or Chief Accounting Officer problem? Can you comment on any growing realization about the revenue function itself as a broad business function? And I just want to definitely get your understanding or your perspective about the emergence of the CRO function and vis-a-vis what it used to be sales ops versus FinOps before. We are passionate about unifying revenue operations, and that usually falls within that sort of central defined function of the CRO. What is it that in the industry across the customers that you are seeing, Ron?
Well, I think revenue back before 606 or even before that, revenue was a back office operation. And it was just you punch out the numbers and people will complain because they don't like what they are. But at the end of the day, it was a back office function. And now, with the opportunities that 606 presents, being able to, sort of represent the way you do business and pulling all the different departments together and trying to be a cohesive unit, what you're seeing is the revenue department is coming out of the back office and being a much more integrated component with each of the different, finance, FP&A, sales, operations, and it is more of a strategic alliance now than what I would say was merely the back office accounting.
Thanks. That's what we see as well. A shameless plug here, but obviously we are a system that's built for that level of unity, between functions, and we definitely would love to, go deeper on some of these conversations as we execute. But again, Ron, this has been great. Thanks for your perspective, and we'll probably pick up some technical accounting topics that are of interest for some of our customers and prospects, and go deeper on upcoming conversations.
Great, thank you.
Thank you both for your comments. Thank you, Ron, for your time today. Please tune in and share with your network. Let us know additional topics of interest to you or questions you may like to see answered.